Hello and welcome to the Daily Bolt. This is the first in the series on the Iowa derecho event from August 10th. And with me today is a special guest, Dr. Bill Gallus, professor of meteorology at Iowa State University. And since I've known Bill for a very long time, I'm going to call him Bill rather than Professor Gallus through the entire interview. I don't know how long this is going to go, but we're going to break it up as need be into nice kind of 10-minute bite-sized chunks. And so we'll just keep broadcasting these throughout the week, starting on Thursday, August 20th. Okay, Bill, welcome to the podcast, and thanks for being here.
Thanks, Jeff, for the invitation.
My pleasure. So I want to actually just get right into talking about the event if I can. And the event has been classified as a derecho, and as the radar loop that I'm going to put up in just a second will show, it does have a clear structure of what we recognize as derecho. But most of the listeners, and I guess in this case viewers, don't really have a good idea necessarily what that means. What's a derecho? Why is it different from a typical thunderstorm? Why is it not a tornado but can still cause as much damage? And if you can go ahead and give me a little bit of background on what a derecho is and say why it's different from a typical even strong thunderstorm or tornado, that's a great place to start.
So a derecho is a thunderstorm system that meets some criteria for producing very strong damaging winds over an unusually large area. So the definition is rather unusual. Most things in meteorology we define by maybe how it looks on radar. So if we see a backwards letter C racing across, we call that a bow echo, and we can say that at any instant while the storm's going on. For derecho, you really have to wait until the storm is mostly over, and you look at all the damage reports that come in and the measurements from the wind. You have to have winds meeting severe criteria, meaning 58 miles per hour or stronger over a distance that ends up being about 240 miles long. It's usually pretty wide, maybe at least a county or two wide. And there should be a few reports actually making it to hurricane strength, about 75 miles per hour. So, the most impressive thing about a derecho is just that it manages to keep producing damaging wind over a very large area. That makes it different from common severe thunderstorms. Any severe thunderstorm in theory is going to be producing winds that get above 58 miles per hour. A derecho just lasts a long time in order to cover 240 miles, and it leaves an especially big footprint of damaging wind in its wake. And Jeff, I think you mentioned, how's it different from a tornado? If you've seen any of the videos out there of roofs being blown off of apartment buildings, or there's one out there where a young man's business, his entire factory or his entire warehouse is just destroyed and he's having to shelter in a little bathroom, it seems like the damage can become comparable to many tornadoes. The difference is that the winds in a derecho are pretty much straight. They're just coming from one direction. In this case, it was primarily blowing from west to east. In a tornado, the winds are actually spinning around. And that's kind of an interesting irony. The term derecho actually was invented over 100 years ago by a physics professor at the University of Iowa. So it's, this derecho is certainly going to stand out as one of the all-time greatest derechos for damage. So it's, in a way, maybe it's appropriate that it struck Iowa, since we're the ones who created the name derecho in the first place.
Well, I guess that, there's a certain irony in that. So I've been playing the loop, which actually comes from Iowa State's experimental, well, it's not experimental anymore, it's environmental mesomet site. I pulled these images off a little bit ago from the website. It goes from about 6:30 in the morning to about 4 in the afternoon. And it's interesting, this doesn't start out with the typical derecho type of a shape in the radar imagery, but as it goes along, about the time it starts getting into central and southern Iowa, you start to see a little bit of the classic shape, and then it really develops that classic shape as it's going through eastern Iowa into Illinois and Wisconsin. Do you have any comments about, you know, that particular aspect of this storm in terms of the formation?
Right. You described it well. You know, when I was describing what the definition of the derecho is, I know when I teach about it, I tell my students it's a weird definition because you can't apply the definition while it's happening because it's based on how much damage it does. But you do see the shape you're referring to is what we often call a bow or a bow echo. And you do see that develop in many places. You know, I think you hit the nail on the head. As it was heading towards central Iowa, which is where, of course, Iowa State is and where I was, that was the weirdest thing is there was a little piece of it, only about the size of one county, that was sort of bowing out and becoming a bow echo. The part that was rolling toward my city looked pretty much straight, just a north-south line, and you normally wouldn't have thought that that would have such strong winds. Where the bowing was happening was just south of my town, and the radar there was showing winds of 130 miles per hour over a big area, and it's only maybe 10 miles away from the Des Moines radar, which means, you know, the radar beam goes up from the radar. So if you're close to the radar, the information is actually not too far above the ground. And you know, I personally was hoping that meant we in Ames would sort of dodge a bullet. That did not prove to be the case, however.
Okay, so I've had the radar loop restarted on the screen while we're sharing it. I don't know how much time you've had to look into the background of the setup of this derecho, but did this particular system, this derecho, have a kind of a classic set of preconditions, or did this one kind of take everyone by surprise?
That is a very good question, and the answer is pretty complicated. When the event ended up happening, and once I got power back, you know, I did look that morning, well, what was going on in the atmosphere, and to me, it looked very classic. That yes, this was a situation where you get derechos. You know, a couple miles up in the sky, the winds had increased and were blowing 50 to 60 miles an hour across northern Iowa and southern Minnesota, which is pretty rare, and especially this summer. Much of the time, our winds a couple miles up were only like 10 miles per hour. And so there was a weather disturbance was passing just to the north of Iowa, and it was leading to this belt of very strong winds that were coming in. In addition, the atmosphere was very unstable. It was incredibly muggy that morning, even though it was very dark and dreary looking. I think the temperature was already around 80 degrees at 10 a.m. With very high humidity. So those really tend to be the ingredients. Now, the thing that was surprising, and I'll tell a funny anecdote here, is we now have computer models that we run on a very fine grid. So they're supposed to be able to predict pretty well thunderstorm systems. And throughout last weekend, they were not showing anything happening in really the south half of Iowa. And there really was almost no signal that anything like this would happen, despite, you know, the larger scale looking pretty favorable for derechos. And I think people may have let their guard down because we start to really put a lot of our you know, we like to rely on those models. So my funny anecdote is, for the first time ever, I'm having problems with raccoons coming in and eating my tomatoes in my garden right off the vines. And so the day before the derecho, I did a search on Google, and I discovered one way to keep raccoons away is supposedly if you take some rags and you soak them in ammonia, and then you lay them around your plants. But it said if it rains, then, you know, this trick totally disappears and you have to go apply the ammonia again. So my wife made a special trip to the store that afternoon, got ammonia. Sunday evening, I thought, it's not going to rain for 5 days. I will put these rags around all my tomato plants. And when I woke up Monday morning, I could see the thunderstorm out in eastern Nebraska. And, you know, we had a very dry summer here in central Iowa. So part of me was hoping, hey, we may get rain. But part of me felt kind of sick, like I just wasted all that ammonia. So I hate to admit it, but I think I attracted the thunderstorm system into Iowa. So I am probably responsible for the billions of dollars in damage.
I see. Okay. Well, we'll make sure to pass that little tidbit along to the proper authorities, and they'll get the bill. You'll get the bill. They'll send you the bill.